all yours.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate it. Boy, that introduction it's almost like we wrote that one. Really quite a pleasure and an honor to be before you to help kick off the new school year. Thank you to Andy Farley and Mark Hansen for bringing us in. Special shout out to Christy Westfall for being our go-to person with a can-do attitude and always open and willing to support us. So thank you, Christy, for all your help. We'll record this, so if we'll find a way to get it to you somehow. So don't be too crazy about taking notes. Just sort of let it soak in. There are a lot of pretty powerful concepts that you'll hear, hopefully life-changing. But if you try to hold on to all of it, your head will hurt. So just let it soak in, and we'll give you the highlights at the end. So right off, we'll start with the title, which is Change the Story, Change Your Life. So it turns out we're going to go right into a brain hack, as Mark referred to. There's a part of your brain called the orbital prefrontal cortex behind the orbit. And it turns out to be extremely powerful. It's likely the reason the Homo sapiens defeated the Neanderthals. And it's really about storytelling and myth making and value constructions. It's a part of their brain that's so powerful that, for example, some of you may have heard of something called the Pepsi paradox, which is that if we do a taste test and I showed you, you can see the labels of the cans, Pepsi and Coke, and you do a taste test, guess which one typically wins? Most people guess Coke, especially in the United States. If you cover the label, Pepsi typically wins. If you have an injury to the part of your brain called the orbital prefrontal cortex, Pepsi always wins. That's amazing. What that means is your storytelling actually changes your biological experience of the world. And there are many more studies like that to prove that. Wine taste testing, for example, if you can see the price, the expensive wines win. If you cover the labels, they all come out equal pretty much. Sorry if you're a wine connoisseur, which is why I only get wine from Trader Joe's, $5 max. And in fact, this part of the brain predicts addiction. It predicts, I will submit to you, all sources of stress and suffering are because of this part of the brain. And so we want to give you, in part, brain hacks to be able to shift the way you perceive the world in order to dramatically reduce stress and create even more creative fearlessness and joy and exhilaration in this life, no matter what your job or no matter what your role is. So that's the big story of what we're going to teach you. Several brain hacks to shift this functioning in the what we call the higher brain. So my story starts out about 35 years ago. I went to med school at UW-Madison, and I was one of these kids who was doing really well. I mean, I lettered in 3 sports. I skipped a few years of school. I started med school when I was 20. It seemed like everything was going great. But the transition from second year to third year of med school was pretty dramatic back then, books to people. And it turns out I was clueless about life. A lot of mental health issues were hidden by outside performance. And so I went from top of the class to bottom of the class, and it was so shaken that I wasn't sure I could even move on with med school. I had trouble with communication and organization and writing H&Ps and what have you. And so luckily, 2 angels showed up in my life. My wife of 35 years, who conveniently is a psychotherapist, and she helped to stabilize me emotionally and psychologically. And then a dear friend of mine, Scott Streckenbach, who's a year ahead of me in med school, helped me to really fall in love with self-help literature. Flash forward, I got a master's degree in clinical research. I did a lot of medical trials at the medical college, as a matter of fact. And the combination of a passion for self-help, medical background and scientist background helped me to gather a lot of tools, really primarily to help myself stabilize psychologically and understand what it took to be more successful as a human being. But then lo and behold, we started to teach this to others, and we've seen some really dramatic effects with every group that we work with. So this is a very optimistic and hopeful story that we will share with you. And so a lot of people joined. We've got close to 20 people helping us in different ways, but these are some of the core people, especially Sarah Engel-Stryker, who's running this Zoom. She's the young lady who took the chance to put her career on hold about 8 years ago and jumped on board and has helped me and us to build this thing we call Leo. And so a lot of people have been instrumental in helping to grow this, including all the audiences that we work with. So we feel like this is something that we are building together with you. And so what this, LEO, Life Ecology Organization, is what our entity is called. LEO meaning lion, meaning being courageous in being a scientist of your life and how to optimize your relationships and your brain and your body and just your life in general. And so what we represent is an aggregation of a lot of different discoveries in brain science, social psychology, functional medicine, you name it. And so how do we take the best discoveries that are out there and turn them into practical tools that you can use? And so we're also very agile in that we iterate rapidly. We've done probably 500 workshops in the last 5 years. And so we deliver, we get feedback, we optimize, we get feedback all the time so that we can make this more accessible intellectually, emotionally, financially. And the results have been remarkable. So this is, again, very hopeful. But it's important for you as school staff. I can't emphasize enough, how much we love working with you. We were actually working with corporations and doing well in 2018, 2019, and then COVID hit and we suddenly stopped and somehow got pulled into the school world, and it's been a beautiful thing. And I want to emphasize how much compassion we have for how much difficulty you've gone through. I think school staff get, all the focus is on the kids, which to some extent is understandable, but it misses the big picture, which is that if the school staff aren't functioning at a really high level psychologically and joyfully, it will be less of a nurturing environment for the kids. And so the airplane analogy is that, they say when the airplane gets turbulent, the masks fall, you put it on yourself first, and then you take care of the others. I think it's really important. Our emphasis is on school staff and empowering them. And we know that it's automatically going to lead to better role modeling of how to deal with difficulty, how to really empathize and innovate education and character building. And so our program is unique in that we focus on school staff first and foremost. And so the gist of this program, broadly speaking, and today is that brain hacks are necessary for you to increase your discomfort tolerance. And discomfort tolerance is going to make everything better in your life. If you don't do this, you will see what's happening in the United States right now through no fault of anybody's. Right now, there's a real panic attack occurring about the future of the world. And unfortunately, because of our wealth as a nation and how comfortable we've been for the last 50, 60 years, and I'm so grateful to be an American. I'm so grateful for the creative platform that this is and what it's given to me. And this is my endeavor to give back. We've really decreased our tolerance for discomfort, which has reduced our adaptability physically, emotionally, intellectually, accountability-wise. But you can change that very rapidly within minutes to hours. And so that's the gist of this. And so let's go and talk about another brain hack. We've already gotten one, which is if you change the way you look at the world, you can literally change your experience of the world. That's pretty profound. So let's take that a step further and teach you about a concept that we call lower brain versus higher brain. If you just learn this concept by itself, it will be life-changing and it'll make this 1 hour worthwhile. Now, there is what we call the older brain, and it's not the reptilian brain. People mistake the two. Reptilian brain has been around for over 4 or 5 million years, but in between is what we call the limbic system. And many people are familiar with fight or flight. And if I ask you, why is it there? People say, understandably, survival, right? And by the way, this part of the brain is the cause of all these problems on the left. SAD is the acronym that we use. And so, in fact, survival is not the main purpose of this part of the brain. That's a big misunderstanding that once you clear that up, it's profound. The main reason for this part of the brain is survival of the genes. It's not survival of the body. The genes just want to get to the next generation in order for them to survive. And then they don't care about our body. So they're like parasites that are riding our body. And so what happened, the context in which, the way natural selection works is we have gene mutations occurring all the time. If you have a bad mutation, it leads to cancer. If you have a good mutation, it leads to some sort of functional improvement that helps you in that context. And the context that this part of the brain developed over the last 2 million years is that we were hunter-gatherers. If I asked you what percentage of our human existence has been farming for the primary basis for our subsistence versus hunting and gathering for our subsistence, think for a second, what percentage have we been farming dominant? Just for a second. People, you have anywhere from 1 to 100%. People will say 5, 10, 40, 50. The answer is actually 0.01%. 99.8% of human history, we've been hunter-gatherers. So these are hunter-gatherer brains that are colliding with the modern world, activating the lower brain and causing all this destruction. And the good news is we can shut that off really fast. But you have to be more conscious about your life and change the story. Okay, and so the context of hunting and gathering was life was very unstable, average life expectancy only 27 years of age. Violence, despite what you see in the media right now, violence-related deaths were 4 to 5 times greater than they are now. So very unstable existence. And so we had to develop a mutation in our brain that would allow us to, pass the genes on before we died. And so what was it? It was the dopamine system, which now everyone's familiar with, but there's aspects of it that you are likely not familiar with that will be life-changing again. One of them is that we're designed to be selfish. And it turns out that the obsession we have with self-esteem and FOMO is a dopamine trick of the lower brain to get us to have better mating success. Better social hierarchy rank leads to better mating success, leads to genes passing on, and the genes say, bye-bye, thank you very much. We don't care about you. You're going to die in 27 years on average. And so we have to, this part of the brain is actually sabotaging us, as we will show you. And so here's why. Turns out in the last 200,000 years, other mutations happened that allowed us to deal with complexity better. And so all these are different parts of the brain that we've identified. These are neural networks that correspond to these various qualities. And so you can see all these listings, this listing on the right. Man, these sound like a lot of good things to have, right? In the higher brain. Here's where things get really interesting. It turns out that you have 2 superpowers that you are likely either not aware of or not taking advantage of. One is that we've proven that your thoughts control where the blood goes in the brain, and you can't be in the lower brain and the higher brain at the same time. So guess what? Your thoughts will determine whether you're higher brain right now or lower brain. That's pretty profound. The other thing is neuroplasticity, which you've likely heard about by now, but don't know how to activate it, which is you can actually grow and shrink any part of the brain that you want. Again, implications profound. These are truly superpowers when you see what's at stake. The problem is the lower brain has a lot of tricks, and the default setting is for us to be lower brain if we don't do anything, especially in the modern world, as we get bombarded with all kinds of information. The storytelling generally tilts far towards left brain or lower brain thinking. And so we become more and more lower brain dominant over time if we don't do anything. And so you've got these 2 superpowers. You have an infinite ability to become higher brain dominant. And that's probably the most meaningful and purposeful thing you do. Meaningful in the sense of becoming higher brain dominant in the midst of chaos is a very awesome accomplishment. Teaching this to others is extremely purposeful. And you in this school platform have an incredible ability to shift society by teaching these young people and the community at large how to become more higher brain dominant in the midst of chaos and difficulty. And so we want to teach brain hacks to shut off the lower brain and brain hacks to activate the higher brain. See what happens, and it's a really cool ride. Okay, so that's another brain hack, which is no matter what your job, no matter what your role, the most purposeful, the most meaningful thing you can do is to learn to become more and more higher brain dominant from moment to moment. And it's a beautiful creation that you've rendered in your brain and helped others to render in their brains. All right. So, by the way, you can Google this, neuroplasticity. You can spend days entertaining yourself with the evidence that neuroplasticity, in fact, exists. The nuns study that showed that the 800 nuns donated their brains to science after they died, and of course, after they died. And they found that many of them had Alzheimer's plaques dense enough that they should have had Alzheimer's, and 0 developed Alzheimer's. They rerouted neural networks, the computer system of your brain. They grew it and rerouted around those to avoid Alzheimer's, which has profound implications for the dementia and Alzheimer's epidemic we have. Many of you have heard of the 10,000 hour idea, which is Anders Ericsson's famous work over the last 30 years, and sadly he passed away just a couple of years ago, demonstrated that you can be a genius basically of anything if you put the time in. And there's another key that I'm going to quiz you on in a second. Taxi drivers, I mean, literally hundreds of studies to show we can grow and shrink any part of our brain that we want to. And again, the implications are profound for this. If you don't do this, a lot of price to pay and a lot of opportunity to miss out on with all these wonderful qualities. And so let me ask you for a second, just to take a break from all the information coming your way. What are the predictors? Just, say it in your mind or say it out loud. What are the predictors of being able to grow neural networks? Think about that. Now, many of you will guess time, practice, persistence. That's correct. So time is key, and we kind of hinted at that with the 10,000 hour idea, the predictor of being a master of your craft. The other big one, and this is of profound importance, is how much feedback you can tolerate, okay? When I say to you, hey, can I give you a little bit of feedback right away? I know that's how I feel. My heart stops, my stomach drops. It's like, how dare you talk to me like that? You don't understand what I'm going through, and you don't get how hard I've worked. And feedback is like, lower brain activation, right? But feedback is the key to growing neural networks and even optimizing your processes of whatever you do. And I'll show you that in a second. And so we've got a little bit of a conundrum here, right? So this gets us, and in the meantime, what's happening is the modern world is really causing neuroplasticity to go to the lower brain, as I was talking about, because if we are unconscious, Nobel Prize winning studies show that the lower brain is going to be dominant unless we consciously shift ourselves to being higher brain. And so that's why we're having such high deaths of despair in this country, political polarization, all this social chaos, all these things are happening because we're so lower brain activated right now. And we had a far to fall. As Americans, we were dominant status-wise and economically. And so our dopamine levels were really high. We were riding high on ourselves. And then the equalization of the world economically and status-wise is causing dopamine levels to drop. And unfortunately, because of our comfort over the last 50 to 60 years, our adaptability quotient has gone down. So our ability to tolerate feedback has gone way down. Physical discomfort, emotional discomfort, intellectual discomfort, accountability discomfort. And so that leads to less adaptability, plus plus drops in dopamine means we're having a panic attack about the future. But again, we can flip this really quickly. All right. So the concept that we had was, what do we have teach people a bunch of brain hacks to shut off the lower brain and a bunch of brain hacks to activate the higher brain? What would happen? And lo and behold, amazing things happen. Across industries, and you can see teachers at the end here, big drops in depression, big drops in anxiety. This is after just a 12-hour intervention of teaching brain hacks, of which you're going to already experience an hour of it. And so we've proven that this stuff works, that you can actually shut off these major problems, a very high percentage in every group. Now you may say, listen, buddy, I don't have depression or anxiety, thank you very much. And that may be true, but it's a false dichotomy. We're somewhere on the continuum of higher brain to lower brain. Everybody is. And so how you define depression and anxiety clinically almost doesn't matter. You may be more towards the lower brain side of the spectrum than you need to be, chances are. And what's scarier is when we're lower brain, we disengage from life subconsciously. And so we lose out on all those wonderful qualities of the higher brain. And so in fact, all kinds of other problems improve as well. We've demonstrated mental health improves across the board, and psychological safety, which is culture, the ability of a group, a community of people to become higher brain dominant and therefore more dynamic and excited and engaged, really improves. And we demonstrated that again with the teachers. Interestingly, energy didn't improve for the teachers, but that was because we surveyed them at the worst time possible. After a 6-month program, we surveyed them in the end of May. That was kind of dumb on my part, but I mean, everyone's running around like chickens with their heads cut off. And so, of course, energy is going to be drained. And then we got a grant from the state of Wisconsin, a pretty big grant, and started delivering this to kids. Same thing. The kids get it. Look at this drop in suicidal ideation and all the others. Of course, sleep issues didn't improve. They've got their own biological reasons for that. Their sleep is completely disrupted biologically. But again, when everything improves, the only explanation is that the lower brains are being shut off and the higher brains, by definition, are coming on, because you can't be in both places at the same time. Okay, so that's hope and excitement about what you can do with your brain. And there's evidence to support these brain hacks. And then when you put the brain hacks together, voila, magic happens. And so let's give you a taste of another brain hack. So this is a brain hacks card that we have, and the leaders will get this when we do the breakout session, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of these various brain hacks. And if I have time, I'll talk about a couple others. But let's focus on this one here that's highlighted. So these are all lower brain shut-off brain hacks, and these are higher brain activation brain hacks. And then at the end, you can kind of combine them into plans where you have one or two brain hacks that you use in a difficult situation. Let's say you have someone's misbehaving, or someone's criticizing you, or something doesn't work out, and you go lower brain and you're like, yuck, and I'm feeling anxious or irritated or angry or frustrated, and you went lower brain. How do we shut that off and then stay anchored in the higher brain? That's the goal. So here's an example. I'll ask you a fun little question, and show of hands, is self-esteem important? Now, almost everybody raises their hands, of course. And in fact, I will prove to you that self-esteem is a waste of time. Self-esteem is a lower brain trick that gets in the way of, guess what? Feedback, right? So let me frame it for you differently. And here's a brain hack for you to start to let go of self-esteem in order to get it out of the way, in order to be a more dynamic human being. And almost all of our suffering comes from the self-esteem brain. So if I said, listen, you have to make a choice. You get to choose. Either you're going to be have high self-esteem and pleasure. Here's these two. These are dopamine systems. Or you get to have joy, power, fulfillment, purpose, meaning, connection, love. Well, pretty good salesman here, right? Which one would you pick? You got to pick one or the other. Of course, self-esteem goes in the garbage can, right? That's the choice that we actually have to make, because your ability to take feedback from a coach, from life, from metrics and measurement, your ability to innovate, your ability to see what's working and not working, to get bumped and bruised by life, to engage life, to be enriched by life, and to grow and learn faster and faster, and then to teach it to other people, is a function of how much diminishment you can tolerate, how much feedback you can tolerate. Like Jack Nicholson in A Few Good Men, you can't handle the truth. That's the problem. Our lower brain is tricking us out of diminishment and lowering of social rank, but it doesn't matter. You don't have to feel good about yourself to be really happy. That's a false choice, okay? And so as a result, unfortunately, people avoid the discomfort of failure, rejection, loss, taking risk, and it's a mistake. It's a lower brain trick. Let me take it a step further. The high of dopamine and adrenaline from engaging life and having external validation and external pleasure is dopamine and adrenaline. And this is where almost everybody lives through no fault of their own. And part of it is like, why wouldn't you want to do all this great stuff on the right? In fact, you can even go further. These are all, by the way, neural networks, okay? Neuroplasticity. You can grow any of these networks as much as you want till the day you die. That's crazy, right? And so the same thing with the neurochemicals that correspond to the higher brain. You get way more dopamine from cycling and innovating and tossing things out and taking risk in life, whether it's deepening a relationship, a new skill, leadership, conflict, taking on difficult conversations, community building some sort of idea or product or service. The exhilaration that comes from iterating and taking risk is incredible range of neurochemicals of happiness and effectiveness that are far superior. But the problem is people don't want to cross what we call the dopamine drop bridge. People don't want to have that yucky feeling of loss and failure and rejection. And you have to remind yourself that's a false story of evolutionary biology and mating success. Who cares? The more you trigger that part of the brain and shut it off, trigger it, shut it off, trigger it, shut it off, eventually it just gives up, picks up its toys and walks out of there, and you are more and more free from the self-esteem brain. Okay, so that's a brain hack right there, is don't take yourself so seriously, other than the fact that you are a source of great creativity, no matter who you are, no matter what your role is, no matter what your task is, no matter what your level of education is. It does not matter. You have an infinite ability to be creative, try new things, see if it works, doesn't work, toss it out, start over. Okay, so here's another brain hack in that regard. I kind of gave it away, silly me, but change the game. This is on the higher brain side of the equation. How do you, what we call change the game means, well, let me ask you this really fun question first, and then I'll elaborate. So if I were to ask you, and again, you can just do this in your mind, and I kind of know what you're going to say because we do lots of these surveys, but what's the number one predictor of happiness and success at work? Is it economic reward and security as a motivation, recognition for a job well done, sense of play at work, sense of purpose and impact, developing new skills? Think about that for a second. Now, I can guarantee you, in almost all audiences, the vast majority say purpose, and that turns out to be the wrong answer. Aha, your lower brain fooled you again into the self-esteem rabbit hole, right? Purpose and impact, that doesn't get the job done from moment to moment. How often is that going to happen, right? But sense of play, really good studies, social science studies, neurobiological studies show that when you have a sense of play, meaning, and we like the word gamification better, which is you try something, you measure if it works or doesn't work, toss it out, cycle really fast. Institutions that have high play ratings, that they really enjoy what they're doing from moment to moment, Southwest Airlines, Apple, Starbucks, they encourage innovation and iteration. And a lot of big companies that have become very successful, Google, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, Netflix, on and on and on, they've cracked the code on this, and we can too. Anybody can do this, especially if you get the self-esteem brain out of the way. Okay, and so here's an example where if I do a labor epidural, I break it down into a system, a process map. You can, and the details don't matter here. Point is, you can create a process map for anything that you do in life. Again, leadership, difficult conversations, conflict resolution, innovation, teaching, how to organize the kids, how to motivate the kids. Like, all these can be turned into processes, but it's scary because you're accountable for what's working and not working, and you're innovating, and you're allowing other people to innovate on your process map. But this is a platform for creativity, a platform for play, okay? And the payoff is multifold. But let me show you other examples. Making coffee, doing the laundry. And they don't have to be this complex, by the way. We need to have some simple ones on here. They can be 2 or 3 steps, and that's it. And you've got a process for dealing with someone who's being a jerk, or a child who's misbehaving, a student who's misbehaving. Just have a process. Am I lower brain or higher brain? If I'm lower brain, what brain hack do I use? Okay, that worked. Now let me work on them. Are they lower brain or higher brain? They're probably lower brain, of course. What brain hack can I try with them? What technique can I try with them? What works, what doesn't work? And you start to develop a process for dealing with misbehavior with a higher brain, lower brain framework. And so the payoff of iterating and trying new things is that feedback. You get feedback all the time. It's scary. Now you're accountable for how you're performing, but it works. It makes you more powerful. Brain power, meaning as you trigger your lower brain by being more creatively courageous, you learn to keep separating from the lower brain and shutting it off and shutting it off. And that builds the neural networks that actually can, the higher brain can actually stop the lower brain from coming on. And the lower brain, by the way, can disconnect the higher brain. This is like an epic battle going on in here that almost no one's aware of. Learning power, you dot connect neural networks of knowledge, understanding, and skills faster and faster, the faster you cycle. So it's great for learning. And then social power, the more you get triggered and go lower brain and you're vulnerable to each other and you share strategies and you share support, it really deepens connections and you become more and more sophisticated also socially. When you learn to iterate fast as a community, you got to learn skills for building psychological safety and not triggering people and resetting when you get triggered when you're debating about ideas, right? So we need to learn to become able to deal with complexity and iteration. In fact, as I mentioned, in Silicon Valley, there's been a revolution happening. Only 0.2% of venture capital funding in the last 20 plus years went into the Silicon Valley model of being agile, which means to try something, assess if it's working, fail fast, as they say, move fast and break things. They are big fans of rapidly iterating. And this is coming to every industry, including schools, I promise you. That 0.2% of investing became 75% of the stock market. That's a revolution, which means all these companies developed because of this methodology, and we can copy it. It's easy. Just do process maps and iterate. Okay. And in fact, the conservative money has now started to go into this model. So insurance companies and pension funds and private equity, the amount of money that's going into this way of running an organization is dramatic increase in the last 4 years. We don't care about the stock market or the money. That's not the point. The point is this is evidence of a social revolution that's coming. And so you now will know how to shut your lower brain off and be creatively fearless. You're going to be riding the wave and being agile. And I know you're already a very lauded school system, but now you can take the game to even another level of iterating and innovating and being scientific about what works and doesn't work, including dealing with sometimes, difficult students or difficult parents or difficult colleagues. It doesn't matter. Innovate. So another brain hack, another way to think about it is your lower brain fools you into thinking that external validation and external pleasure are the key to happiness. They are not. Those definitions of success are flawed. And I know a lot of wealthy people, being a physician and knowing and people in a higher socioeconomic class, and a lot of them are miserable human beings. Why? Because they got hooked on the dopamine of external validation and external pleasure, and they dropped in their tolerance of the dopamine drop. So they lose that creative fearlessness. And in the process of trying to hold on to their success and hold on to their status and hold on to their money, they become stressed all the time, trying to protect what they have. And this is, in some extent, is what's happened to Americans, is we're trying to hold on to what we have instead of remembering we have the greatest platform for creativity in the world, bar none. There is no other country like this, where if you are hardworking and you're higher brain and you're humble and you iterate, we're a bunch of garage tinkerers in this country. We're pioneers, garage tinkerers, restless souls. And so we can be creative. If you have a good idea, it's going to be well received, and there'll be a market for it, whether it's a financial market or a social market. And so remember, don't let your lower brain fool you. External success, money, status, they pale by comparison to being creatively fearless and joyful and becoming higher brain dominant, so you can really shut off the lower brain. These are monstrous achievements that pay forever. That's why Henry David Thoreau talks about people living lives of quiet desperation as their soul song goes with them to their grave. Yeah, most people are stuck because they're afraid of the dopamine drop, and they just keep going to the same well of success and validation that they're good at, but they don't realize that they get bored and depressed and even addicted as a result. Okay. And this is a good way to keep that in perspective. And so, I ask you, which of these snowflakes is the most beautiful, right? Trick question. In Wisconsin, once it's to pass a couple inches, they're all ugly to me. But at the crystal level, they are amazingly beautiful, and they're so varied, right? And the same thing goes with the analogy, is that it doesn't matter what your job is. What matters is, are you pushing to be a genius or a master of your craft? It doesn't, every single job there is can be turned into a process map, and it becomes growing neural networks of skill and knowledge and understanding, and growing process maps that become more and more effective and sophisticated. Same thing with, it doesn't matter what your role in life is. They're all capable of beauty. Put the focus on beauty, not purpose and impact on the world. That'll happen automatically, because if you show people how to be creatively fearless and higher brain dominant in the midst of chaos, you will start to shift all the people around you, and there'll be more than enough purpose and impact. But that happens here or there. And so your process map can be also a source of beauty. And so really, everybody matters. Because in a process map, anybody can come up with an idea, even on a labor epidural process map. People can say, well, have you thought about doing this first, or changing the sequence, or measuring it in a different way, regardless of education, right? So really, we need to remember, in organizations that focus on process maps as a way to democratize and empower everybody in the organization, do very well. There's really good evidence for that. And so regardless of your role in society, put the focus on the fact that you can be creatively joyful, you can be a genius of what's in front of you, you can have fun with the iterative process. And oh, by the way, you're going to trigger your lower brain once in a while, you'll shut that off. Brain power, learning power, social power. And if only it were so easy, and it is to some extent. For some of you, just this talk alone will likely cause a shift. We did a 2-hour presentation in Marathon school system. And I got an email from this superintendent. I've never seen anything like this in 40 years. 2 principals, a special ed teacher, saying the mindset has shifted, the culture has shifted already. So it's very possible that you as a community can go higher brain, and it's beautiful. It's a beautiful accomplishment. It's a beautiful thing to experience. And we need that because we're losing too many good people from the school world because of how stressful it's been. And so it's really, so I think, but it's important to recognize that your lower brain is very powerful. Nobel Prize winning studies show that our primary motivation is avoidance of loss. And so it's critical for you to structure your life in order to force the discomfort agenda. There's a couple ways to do that. One is process maps. There's nowhere to run or hide. You're transparent in what's working and not working. Community based, like you're doing now, a community-based acquisition of a new toolkit so that everyone is pushing each other to be more higher brain dominant in the midst of difficulty. And so you've got to find ways to push across that dopamine drop bridge. And that's where these brain hacks are very helpful. You learn brain hacks to shut off the lower brain and stay anchored in the higher brain. But the subconscious mind is very powerful at seducing you into staying comfortable. So you got to figure out a way to structure discomfort into your life, schedule discomfort into your life, group-based mechanisms for making sure we're uncomfortable, process maps for discomfort. And so the formula that's worked for us, and you can copy this, whether we show you the rest of the journey or you do this on your own. Welcome discomfort, learn to be okay and accept yourself as you are, and recognize when you're lower brain. And that's the worksheet that you'll go through with your leaders in the breakout session after this. Learn to be creatively fearless. Create discomfort on purpose because you both are exhilarated and you trigger your lower brain so you can shut it off and get more and more control over it. You can also learn how to directly activate the higher brain as you learn to cool down your lower brain. Then things get into even more of a virtuous cycle. As this comes on, this goes off, etc. And like I said, you need to have structured discomfort into your routine, and you need to have group-based mechanisms to make sure we're pushing each other to become more and more higher brain dominant, more and more creatively fearless, and more self-accepting, but at the same time accountable for getting better and better. And so, it's so vital. To me, community mechanisms are disappearing. Religious participation has gone way down. Civic organizations have been vaporized. Small town get-togethers, are disappearing. Schools are like one of the last places for a community-based, acquisition of a new toolkit and a higher level of functioning, and then to role model that for the rest of the community. I think school systems are paradoxically, you've been burdened with so much with the vaccine situation and the masking situation and the mental health epidemic that was already there. And then now it's even worse, but we need you. And so I'm hoping we can teach you these tools and that you'll absorb even what we've taught you today. And so that we need you to really stabilize society, shut off the lower brain for society in order to become more psychologically stable, and then go back to being higher brain and creatively joyful. And so it's heartbreaking to see brothers and sisters fighting with each other, Fox News versus MSNBC, left versus right. This is a mistake of the lower brain. It's a panic attack because fear of the future causes us to be hyper tribal. We need to stop that. The war is actually in lower brain versus higher brain. We need to help each other. There's no need to compete with each other. Everyone's got their own genius that they're working on. So there's no reason to compete. How much money you make and what your status is, who cares? Moment to moment, that doesn't matter. What matters is creative fearlessness and being higher brain dominant in the midst of difficulty. So you live a life that's uninhibited. So we need to elevate each other. And once we become higher brain, it's very easy to reconcile. There's good evidence that left and right come back together and we find balanced approaches to solving problems. We become problem focused, solution focused. And frankly, if we divide our, Lincoln's "A house divided cannot stand." There's 330 million people split in two, 160 million each. We're going to get destroyed by the Chinese and the Indians. They have 1 billion plus. They're hungry. They have self-belief. They're growing rapidly. They're going to be equal to us in 10 to 15 years. And so we still have the best system in the world for creative freedom. And so it's critical for us to elevate each other and not tear each other down. It's a trick of the lower brain. And so I beg you to learn these tools and teach it to others. Otherwise, the price to pay of having a lower brain dominant department, a lower brain dominant community, a lower brain dominant school system, a lower brain dominant society is what we're experiencing now with hyperpolarization, chaos, and deaths of despair from mental health crisis. So the good news is, as you've seen with our evidence, 12 hours of content, distributed over 3 to 6 months, and you're seeing these profound shutoffs of the lower brain. So it's very gettable as a community. So I want you to just keep that in mind. And in fact, this stuff is actually easy to do once you have good organization and awareness, which you now have. Okay. And again, there's nothing more meaningful than becoming higher brain dominant in the midst of difficulty and uncertainty, because what you've done is created a beautiful expansion of your higher brain to be able to handle that. And then to teach this to other people, and nowhere else but school systems, you have this kind of opportunity at scale to be able to elevate a whole community of people to being more higher brain dominant. So again, something joyful and purposeful for you, but also vital for society. And then icing on the cake is that as you become higher brain dominant, you become creatively fearless. And so even your career, you will become more successful at it, but you won't be so attached to the outcomes from a external dopamine perspective. It's just a platform for creativity for you. As you become successful, you get to play more, right? Elon Musk, they said, hey, you just became the richest man in the world. He's like, okay, that's really interesting. Back to work. For him, it's about a platform for creativity. And so that's what we can do, is to become fearless and then expand our process maps, our communities, our neural networks, and we get to play. And the success will take care of itself easily if you can tolerate iteration, metrics, coaching, competition, feedback, right? Education doesn't matter. And so really, no matter what your role or your job, again, all these are qualities that radiate from you as you become more higher brain dominant. It's a beautiful thing. And we need to encourage as many people to achieve this kind of beauty. Here are some quotes from school leaders that have gone through this. And the point is not for this to be a sales pitch of the LEO program. We have literally unlimited opportunity to do this stuff because unfortunately we have a mental health epidemic. So that's not the point. The point is that these leaders are saying that something shifted in their community. So whether we help you go the rest of the way or you come up with something on your own, some other program, it really doesn't matter. Do something so that the whole community goes to another level in terms of its toolkit of staying higher brain dominant and shutting off the lower brain. And so this one group, Shell Lake, after 6 months of learning these, look at what happens to their psychological safety. Remember, we measure two things to demonstrate the impact of this program. One is mental health parameters, which I showed you some of those, and the other is psychological safety. There are validated ways to measure if people feel safe psychologically in their environment, which is the best predictor of organizational success. That's been validated now for 25 years, and it makes sense. So look at the before and after in terms of, am I comfortable and confident with sharing ideas, even if they're unconventional, before and after? My team morale, look at the boost. And this speaks to what both leaders said about the change in their culture. During meetings, am I comfortable, confident having open discussions with problem solving and decision making? Look at this big jump, 57 to 82%. So this is after, This is a community becoming more higher brain dominant together. And that is so cool, and such a great place to work when you have more and more people operating from a higher brain dominant place. We can challenge each other, we can innovate, we can assess, we can cycle. It's a rush from moment to moment. Yes, you're going to get bumped and bruised, you're going to get lower brain activated, but then you're going to help each other shut it off. And there's others, several measures of psychological safety, able to bring up problems and tough issues. This is almost a doubling that occurred, right? Working with members of this team, my unique skills and talents are utilized, right? Look at that big boost. So very hopeful about what we can do as a community. To me, community is the key, and it's our lack of community in a sense that's creating a lot of our suffering. This American rugged individualism, the brain science shows that does not work. It doesn't work for happiness. It doesn't work for success. It doesn't work for health. It doesn't work for anything. So we need to abandon this rugged individual idea, this self-esteem concept, and learn to deeply connect with each other and elevate each other non-competitively. Nice thing is, the teachers, they were doing their job because it was fun, was the same before and after. So that's good to see. And so a lot of organizations have gone through this, but like I said, we took a detour and we are so thrilled. In fact, I'm not even working that hard to work with corporations because working with school systems is so fun because you are special people. I want you to hear that, okay? This is a physician that's saying that. I think you're more special because you have a combination of intelligence and humility. You're not dopamine addicts like some of us physicians, and you are very heart-centric and care about your community. That's why we are in love with working with school systems, but we also need you to be psychologically more stable in order to help society. So you've got a critical role, not to burden you with one more thing. And so, we'll talk about this, especially in the leader breakout session at 3:00. But just remember, there's so many tools out there that you can learn from that can shut off the lower brain. Self-acceptance is powerful. Don't beat yourself up. This brain is so sophisticated. Look at driving and language and even riding a bike. AI has not been able to figure that out. Our AI, our artificial intelligence, is so much more sophisticated, but it also learns a lot of lower brain habits. You cannot beat yourself up and you cannot beat other people up for having lower brain habits. Having been someone who's had a lot of lower brain habits that I've been working through, I know from where I speak. Difficult conversations, you can take them and break them down into 3 big categories, and it makes them less intimidating. But you cannot trust yourself. Your lower brain is going to seduce you into being comfortable. Fight that urge, okay? Non-judgment, also very powerful. Not because we're going to let people get away with misbehavior. That's not what we're talking about. The point is, if you judge others, you go lower brain, they go lower brain, and your chance for influence is gone. So if you're irritated with somebody, angry with somebody for misbehaving, what have you, it doesn't work. And everyone loses, basically. There are a lot of ways that you can activate the higher brain. Stage 1 activation means different techniques that you've heard of. And once what we figured out is even people like chronic pain patients who are really lower brain activated, of course, when we taught them to shut off the lower brain, then they were able to take off with things that they thought were impossible. The ability to meditate for someone who's in chronic pain. Are you kidding me? Yes. They were able to, almost all of them, take off with their meditation practice. And meditation, defined very broadly, means higher brain activation. It can be prayer, it can be music, it can be silence, it can be the feeling state of love, right? These are ways that you can directly activate the higher brain. And then in time, you can combine brain hacks and see what works and doesn't work. Be a scientist of yourself, okay? And so in that regard, the breakout session that you're going to have next are these worksheets where you'd be like, okay, let's explore a little bit further what this lower brain, higher brain business is. What are the implications? Here are all the signs that my lower brain is activating. Okay, you'll be surprised at how much is accounted for by the lower brain, including almost all chronic disease is because of lower brain activation. So learn to be self-accepting. and self-compassionate and compassionate to others. But be a scientist, because if you can't face and take the feedback that your lower brain is on right now, you lose the chance to shut it off and get mastery over it. And in the background, subconsciously, the lower brain will keep doing damage in the form of damage to the brain and the body from stress hormone cortisol, damage to relationships because of reactivity, damage to opportunity because of disengagement. And when you're lower brain, you're like, just leave me alone. I just want to just sit here. I don't want to do anything. The problem is you live a life that's much less rich and much less higher brain dynamic and more powerful. And so that's a tragedy in a sense. You're on this rock for another 20, 30, 40 years. Do something cool with this life, wherever you are, whatever your role in society is, innovate, create, build, connect. And so it's really important to be aware of the lower brain activating and accept it, because that paradoxically allows you to step outside of it. By the way, another brain hack. And then you'll talk about signs my higher brain is activating. And people are like, wow, this is pretty cool. Wouldn't it be awesome to have some more of these? And then when you start doing these practices and you become more and more self-aware, we call this mindfulness on steroids. Mindfulness doesn't really work it's very equivocal in the outcomes. And the reason is if you don't have self-esteem out of the way, you're not really able to be radically transparent and radically self-aware. That's when you get to the action of understanding your lower brain and how it's subconsciously sort of diverting you away from risk-taking in this life. So once you start doing that and you start noticing some of the lower brain signs coming off, some of the higher brain signs coming on, you're like, boom, this stuff is awesome. I want to work on this all the time. And you don't have to devote a lot of time to it. You can actually, the nooks and crannies of your life, this stuff can fit into. As you're a scientist of yourself, being super, self-aware and radically transparent, you're constantly shifting to higher brain on the fly in the nooks and crannies of your life, as I said. So that's another brain hack. Like, don't feel like this is some big deal that's going to take a long time. Neuroplasticity can happen instantaneously, seconds, minutes, hours. And so don't let your lower brain talk you into, we don't have time for this garbage. Like, we have a to-do list that's like 50, items long. So it turns out this does not take a lot of time. It's awareness and organization. So with that, I want to thank you. We're, again, so honored to be a part of your kickoff. And it's such a pleasure. And I'm looking forward to further interacting during the day. But remember, you can stay higher brain dominant. You have an infinite capacity to become more higher brain dominant. And that includes the ability to tolerate greater physical, emotional, intellectual, and accountability discomfort and crises, which you're dealing with all the time in a school community. But you can reframe these situations so you can take discomfort and channel it to becoming more powerful. That by itself is a brain hack. And it doesn't preclude you from taking action, holding people accountable for their behavior, but it's much more powerful when you do it from a higher brain place. Much more creativity, love, trust, psychological safety. And then it's endless meaning for you to be able to continue to test your system and become more higher brain dominant, to teach this to others, to actually literally go so far as to fall in love with discomfort, because it leads to more and more brain power, learning power, social power, actual neural networks in your brain. Let go of self-esteem, let go of FOMO. Those are all tricks of the brain. External pleasure and validation pales by comparison to the internal high of higher brain activation and creative fearlessness. And so you really do have an unlimited ability, unlimited access to happiness, success, power, fulfillment, purpose, meaning, love, connection, genius, right where you are, regardless of your role or the task that's before you. And it's really important to just keep being fearless, but also self-aware, because you're going to get triggered, shut that off, back to higher, back to fearless. And that beautiful cycle is what makes life extremely rich. And so with that, I will say thank you so much for this opportunity. I wish you a wonderful school year. I know how important you are. I hope you know how important you are. And I hope these kinds of tools can help you keep your reserves high so that you can do the critical societal work that you're doing. Beyond just education, it's also about character building, and this stuff can accelerate your ability to elevate the character of the students and the community. So with that, I want to say thank you, and I'll see some of you a little bit later.
Thank you, Dr. Raj.
Thank you.
My takeaways: be a scientist of your life, increase your discomfort tolerance, and creative fearlessness. Thank you, Dr. Raj, for the brain hacks. As we turn the next 30 minutes over to sites, I offer you well wishes on the start of the best year yet. Thank you for choosing Elmbrook, but most importantly, thank you for teaching to the edges and reaching every student, every time, all the time. Push to be a genius at what you do. Make sure you stay higher brain dominant and get after it. Have a great year. Thanks, everybody.
Well stated. Beautiful. Thank you.